trusting in your idols at Bethel and Gilgal, they're going to be no help. When the Assyrians come, you're going to be in ruin.
Always willing, but we have to seek, we have to knock, we have to be willing to go to God. I'm reminded of, when the children of Israel, when Moses had the law and he read it to them, he told them all the good things that God would do for them if they kept his law. And when they disobeyed, he also told them the bad things that would happen. And so we're seeing the same thing, I believe, here.
Yeah, that's what's happening here. God had warned them back in the book of Deuteronomy, particularly chapters 25 to 28. He talked about blessings and cursings. And he says, if you turn away from me, if you worship idols, here's what's going to happen. Well, here it is. It's now happening. If we had a question here in the middle of our page about justice and righteousness, that's important to God. When injustice and wickedness fill a nation, God will bring judgment upon it. How had injustice and wickedness filled the land of Israel? What were some of the things that the people were doing as an expression of their wickedness and injustice toward one another? Some of the things they were doing. What is it?
Serving idols.
Okay, they served idols. Yes. Yeah, they hated others who were more righteous than themselves. And, that's the wicked people often do that. They look at righteous people and they hate them because the righteousness of that person condemns their own life. What are some other things you see in the text here? Can't hear you, Doc.
Oppressing the poor.
They were oppressing the poor. That's right. They were oppressing the poor. They distressed the righteousness. They were placing high taxes on the people. They were taking larger portions than they should have, and they were accepting bribes. And I think that's one of the worst things you see here, that here's someone, a case is brought before a judge, and someone pays off the judge in order to rule in their favor. And, the wealthy man, he might be able to pay off the judge. The poor man, well, the righteous man, no matter what he's got, he's not going to engage in that. But that's just some of the ways that they were practicing wickedness and unrighteousness. So the people needed to choose God. They had to choose God, not the idols. And it was the idols that allowed them to do all this wicked stuff. It's hard to figure out, what appeal does idolatry have? What appeal does it have? It lets you do what you want to do. That's the appeal of idolatry. Whether it's sexual immorality or whether it's cheating other people, idolatry allows that.
Yep. I believe Connie had a comment. Right. So Connie said that they were following the desires of their own heart instead of following righteousness. And had they followed righteousness, then they would have been instructed how to treat one another.
Yeah, and that's tragic that they were doing that. Notice in verse 6 in the middle, it said, "Seek the Lord that you may live." That's the second time that he said that. Seek the Lord that you may live, or he will break forth like a fire, O house of Joseph. Now, you might look at this and wonder, what is this house of Joseph? Well, remember, Joseph was the brother who got sent down into Egypt by his older brothers. And down there he married, had children. And the name of his two children were what? What and what? Yep. Ephraim and Manasseh.
Right.
And when they came into the promised land, God gave a huge portion of land to Ephraim and a huge portion of land to Manasseh. In fact, Manasseh actually had two portions of land. But it was, so sometimes the northern kingdom is just called Joseph because Ephraim and Manasseh had the largest parts of land, but also they were kings came out of those tribes. And so that's why you see the term justice or Joseph there as a representative of the nation of Israel. Look at verse number 8. What do you see about God in verse 8? Give me some help on that. The first line is, he who made Pleiades and Orion. That's telling you what about God? Okay, he's the creator. He changes deep darkness into morning. What does that tell you about God? Okay, he's all powerful.
Yeah. He's in control.
He's the controller. So he's the creator. He's the powerful controller. He darkens day into night and calls for the waters of the sea. Now, there's some question as to what that's talking about when it calls for the waters of the sea. Some people say, well, that's talking about a flood coming, like the sea, like we've experienced here in Southeast Texas, some. Or others just say, no, this is about the rain, that God causes the sea to evaporate. The mist comes over the land and falls in the form of rain. And so here God would be the one who provides, who sustains us. So God's the creator, the controller, and the sustainer or the provider. And it says he pours that water out on the surface of the earth. So I think that's probably talking about the rain. And so here it's talking about God's power, what God does. The Lord is his name, and yet these people were not following him. So now what would he become? God has blessed them in so many ways, but now verse 9 tells what he's going to become. And that's what?
A destroyer.
What is it?
A destroyer, someone said.
Yeah, he's going to be the destroyer. He who flashes forth with destruction upon the strong, so that destruction comes upon the fortress. And so here you see God playing at least 4 or 5 different roles in this text. But because the people did not appreciate God, God now becomes the destroyer. Okay, did we have another question there? Well, let's look at verse 10. In fact, let's read verses 10 down to 13, Terry, please.
Verse
10 to 13.
Okay, verse 10. They hate the one who rebukes in the gate, and they abhor the one who speaks uprightly. Therefore, because you tread down the poor and take grain taxes from him, though you have built houses hewed in stones, yet you shall not dwell in them. You have planted pleasant vineyards, but you should not drink wine from them. For I have known your manifest transgressions and your mighty sins, afflicting the just and taking bribes, diverting the poor from justice at the gate. Therefore, the prudent keep silent at that time, for it is an evil time.
Yeah, this is an interesting text. If you look at the questions on your worksheet, in what way did Israel treat God's prophets? In what way did Israel treat God's prophets? Based on verse 10. Yeah, they hated them.